This is one of the books that changed my life, Diet for New America. I remember years ago that I was putting together a presentation on health and nutrition and vegetarianism, and my wife and I were going to hold a cooking school at one of the local churches in Lodi. And I wrote the publisher of Diet for New America, and I asked if it was all right to use some of the material that was in the book, and they cordially wrote back and said that would be fine. And I made my overhead projection slides at that time, not quite PowerPoint. And I learned so much from this book that it impacted me and motivated me. I would say it was one of the main catalysts for modern Manna to even be here today. And I said to John, look at the fruit of even your labors, because it affected me and it's affected you, and it spreads. And we have a lot of people here as a result of this. There's a movement going on. John has written a book called The Food Revolution. This is an outstanding book. Outstanding. You know, when I looked at Diet for New America, I said, will it be as good? And I have to say it's every bit as good, if not better. They're both very special books. So it's a privilege for me tonight to introduce to you from California, John Robbins.
I'm glad to be with you. It's an honor and a privilege to speak with you this evening, this late afternoon. I want to talk a little bit, first introduce myself a little bit in the path that I've been on and some of the experiences that I've had and some of the choices that I've made, and what I've learned from making those choices, what the results have been. Because my path has been a little bit unusual in some respects. I was born, as some of you may know, into a very wealthy family, the Baskin-Robbins ice cream family. My dad is the founder of the company. And 3 years after he started it himself, my uncle, Bert Baskin, joined him. And together they then built 31 Flavors, which became the world's largest ice cream company, literally a billion-dollar company, a multi-billion-dollar company. And as my dad's only son, it was his plan that I would succeed him in the business, that I would take it over. And he trained me to do that. From my earliest childhood, I was working at the age of 6, actually. I was beginning to work in different parts of the business from his idea that I would learn all the facets of the company so that one day I would be able to do what he had in mind for me. It was a path paved with gold because of the success of the company. It was a path paved with ice cream. And as a young lad growing up in Southern California, where, as you know, it gets very hot in the summers, I wasn't too unhappy with that part of it. I ate way more than my share of ice cream. In fact, when people find out now that I don't eat ice cream anymore, they sometimes feel sorry for me. And I say, please don't. You really don't have to. I have eaten enough ice cream in my childhood alone for 20 lifetimes, believe me. So I grew up, we literally had an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in our backyard. And large commercial freezers in our home with had all of the 31 flavors that were in the stores that month, plus experimental flavors that we were working with. And I took it upon myself to taste every one of them. And I did have an involvement there. I am the person that invented Jamocha almond fudge. Well, some of you clap, some of you moan. You see, this is it right there. Because as I was starting to mature and coming of age, I felt my own awareness and conscience developing, my own instincts for where I was drawn in life, my own sense of calling, because I did have a feeling that I was being called somewhere. The problem was that where I felt God wanted me to be was very different from where I felt my dad wanted me to be. My dad's script for my life was that I'd follow in his footsteps and run Baskin-Robbins, and so there would be 31 flavor stores in every country in the world. I, however, was beginning to feel that's not what God wanted of me, and there was some other direct, and it was very hard because I believe that we're to honor our mothers and fathers, but what do you do if what your father wants, your earthly father, is different from what you feel your heavenly Father wants? It's not easy. It was painful. It was stressful. I tried to be as respectful as I could at each stage of the process. But at a certain point when I was 21, I told my dad that this really wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. And he was very hurt and very angry. And I do understand his point. He had worked very hard his whole life to achieve a level of financial success that, quite frankly, most people can only ever dream about. He wants to share it with his only son. He gets what he must have thought was the only kid in the country that would turn it down. But I had a calling and I had a mission, and I felt I had to move in a different direction. So I said I didn't want to invent a 30-second flavor. I didn't want to make ice cream. I didn't want to sell ice cream stores. I didn't want to be involved in the ice cream business in any way. And there were many reasons for that, but it was a very hard thing to say to my dad. And I furthermore said to him I didn't want to have, because I felt this is what in order to make this break clean, in order to be clean with this decision and live it with integrity, I made a choice for integrity that some people can't understand. And I said to my dad, I don't want a trust fund. I don't want an inheritance. I don't want any of your money. I want to live in a different way than this and see where it leads. Because I felt called and I felt God wanted me and would bless me in some way. Maybe not materially, certainly not at the level that my dad lived. But I felt, and I've always felt, and this is what I want to talk about, that when we say no, when we refuse the world's evils, when we say no to the distractions from what is essential to us, to our hearts, to our souls, to our spirits, so that our bodies can be temples for the living Spirit, for the Holy Spirit, so that our hearts can be open to God, so that our minds can be clear, so that our lives can be reflections and statements of what we most deeply cherish and value and what really gives us life, then there are risks associated with that. There are things we say no to in order to uphold that. But there are rewards, there are blessings that make it all worthwhile. And sometimes we have to say no to that ice cream cone, or in my case, the infinite number of ice cream cones, in order to live a healthier and happier, truly, way. So I made that decision and I left. And I no longer, and have been true to that decision ever since. And I've never taken a penny from my dad. And my wife, Deo, who is here today, somewhere in this audience, I can't see where with the lights. Hi, Deo. Deo and I have been together 37 years. And bless her heart, she supported me in this decision when we made it together. And that wasn't easy. She came from a family which had to count every penny. But we made this decision, and we lived very, very simply. You could even say austerely. But we felt rich because we had love and because we were following what we felt was truth. And ice cream, an ice cream cone isn't going to kill anybody. I never have thought it would. But the more ice cream you eat, statistically, this is just a matter of health fact. The more ice cream you eat, the more likely you are to have a heart attack. The more likely you are to have diabetes because of the high sugar content. The more likely you are to have cancer. It's not a healthy food. And certainly, if I'm going to be selling a product, I want it to be one that if people partake of it, their lives will be better for that experience. And that I didn't feel was true about ice cream. And it's interesting how it's come true. My uncle, Bert Baskin, I mentioned him to you earlier, he enjoyed ice cream. He weighed about 240 pounds. He liked the family product. At the age of 51, he died of a heart attack. And when that happened, I said to my father, do you think there could be any connection between the amount of ice cream that he would eat and his fatal heart attack? And my dad said, oh no, his ticker just got tired and stopped working. And I looked into my dad's eyes, and I saw his implacable commitment not to consider that possibility. And I understood why. By that point in time, he had manufactured and sold more ice cream than any human being that had ever lived on this planet. He did not want to think or feel that his product was harming anybody, particularly that it had contributed in any way to the death of his beloved brother-in-law and partner. But the facts are what they are. I wrote Diet for a New America some years later. I sent my dad a copy, an autographed one. I don't think he read it. He had his path, I had mine. He called me the granola flake. My mom said, "You will not cook tofu in my kitchen." It's like they called me carrot head. Anything. But there were a number of things we weren't able to talk about. We didn't argue any longer. The die was cast. A couple years after the book came out, my dad's diabetes had gotten very bad. His high blood pressure had gotten very bad. The way he put it, he was losing the battle of the bulge. He was becoming, as we tend to do in our lives, the physical embodiment of his attitudes and his beliefs. His God was money, and he had a lot of it. He wasn't very happy, though, and he was certainly not very well. And he went one day to his physician. He lived in Rancho Mirage outside Palm Springs, and he went to his heart specialist one day and to juggle his medications for his blood pressure because the side effects were getting to him. And his doctor did something extraordinary. His physician leveled with him, and he said, "Mr. Robbins, you are today a very sick man, a very sick man. And if you continue the way you're going, all we can do for you is try to juggle some of the pills you're taking and adjust the dosages and try to make your very few remaining years a little more comfortable. But if you're willing to make changes in how you live, real changes, deep changes in what you eat, then there might be a different outcome." And then he handed him a copy of Diet for a New America. And he did not know that the author of the book was the son of his patient. And my dad didn't tell him. It was early in the book's life, and all the publicity that eventually occurred about that reality had not yet. And he was merely offering it because of its what he felt to be the medical value. And now I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in that room and seen my dad's face, because this was the collision of two worlds. This was, from my father's point of view, the high priest of Western medicine. This was the exalted physician who my father had placed his life in his hands, telling my father that he should read the book that his maverick son had written, who'd walked away from everything he had built. And it was a difficult moment, I'm sure, for my dad, but he did want to get better. By this time, his high blood pressure was so bad, he had to take 10 of what he called horse pills every day. The side effects were extremely debilitating. His diabetes had progressed to the point that they were talking about an amputation of a foot or even a leg. He loves to play golf, and at this point, he couldn't even get out of the golf cart to swing a club. So he had some motivation, and he began to read the book, and he began to make some small changes. I have a feeling he read the copy of the book that the doctor gave him, not the one I'd sent him. But he began to make changes, and he began to get some results. So he made more changes and got further results, made more changes, got further results. To make a long story short, in the next 3 years, his cholesterol level dropped from 280 to 150. His blood pressure normalized. The pills he'd been told he'd have to take for the rest of his life, he no longer needed. His diabetes went into remission. He no longer needed not only the shots, he didn't need the diabetic pills either. His blood sugar levels were in a great level of equilibrium for the first time since in 40 or 50 years. He said to me, "Johnny, I'm not a card-carrying vegetarian," he said. I said, "You don't have to be. How are you feeling?" And he said, "Better than I felt in eternity." He said, "But there's certain things about this." He says, "One of the things," he said, "that's always bothered me about you," he said, speaking to me, "is you don't have a price. Everyone else has a price, but you." And I said, "Well, I have a price. It's just measured in a different coin. It's not of the material plane. It's what gives us life." And he said, "Well, when you left, I put every objection in your way. I criticized you and I mocked you, and this is true, he had done that. And he said, I was afraid for you. But thank God you followed your own star, because time has proved you right." Now, I want to tell you, I was more proud of my father that he could say that to me than I am of all of his business achievements, because it was of the heart. And you know how hard it is for a man in his position, his social status, his level of achievement in the material world, to say to the son who walked away from that in order to obey a higher, what he felt was a higher calling, "You were right." This is a humble thing to say for a man whose life is not built around humility. And I admire that he could do that, and I appreciate the inner strength that he could do that. And I'm very grateful that I could have played the part that I did in his healing, because he's still around. And he's now in his late 80s, and he is enjoying his life more now than he was 15 years ago, much more physically. And he's playing golf, and he's enjoying every day with a sense of amazement, frankly. He says, "It's unbelievable what has occurred here." So I'm very grateful that God has allowed me to play this role in his life, because I disappointed him so severely at one point by not doing what he had believed to be what I should do. But as a result of it all, I have perhaps been able to be part of giving him a greater blessing and a more important gift. And by that I mean not just health, as important as that is, as crucial, as wonderful as that is, but the awareness that there might be something more to us, to what's going on here, that meets the eye, than you can buy with money. And a couple of weeks ago, my parents visited our family. I live with my wife, Deo, and our son, our 30-year-old son, and his wife, and their our grandbabies, their two twin sons. And my parents came to visit us. And at the end of it, my mother said, "Well, you may not be rich in material things, but you're rich in love, and I'm beginning to think that might even be more important." Amen. You know, when my uncle died of a heart attack, my dad eventually had, as I told you, this severe case of diabetes, the high blood pressure, and all the other problems. These are men who loved ice cream, who had a remarkable access to it. And there was something about that seems lawful. Sad, tragic, but lawful. Predictable even. Because I believe that there is something in us. I believe God wants us to be healthy, and we have the ability to be healthy. But that if we deviate from the laws that we are obliged to obey, then there are repercussions. And I think those repercussions have a purpose. They're signals that something is in distress, that something is wrong. To draw our attention to that fact, that we might learn, that we might have the motivation to shift what we're doing into a healthier direction and learn how to adhere to principles of health that are very simple, really, very natural, really. But the irony is they're very difficult sometimes to really get because we live in a culture that is so flagrantly distant from that basic understanding, as simple though as it may be. I mean, we're surrounded by McDonald's and Burger King and Baskin-Robbins and KFC and all of these other franchises whose food offerings are tasty and convenient and relatively cheap if you measure them by the cost you pay at the cash register, but so profoundly expensive if you see deeper than that, to our connection to our spirits, to the health and vitality of our bodies, to our well-being as communities. I've been talking about these kinds of subjects for years now and going around a lot, and I want to tell you a story of one thing that happened about 10 years ago. I got a phone call from a woman who was on the line, and she said she was a producer for a television show, and they wanted to do a feature on me and my work. And I said, well, what is the name of your show? And she said, Lifestyles. And I don't watch television, and I didn't even own one at the time, and I don't watch very much now, and I'm not a television aficionado, that's for sure. So I wouldn't know Lifestyles from Schmeifstyles, I just wouldn't. And I said, well, but I had the feeling I should watch it once to get a feel for it so that I would understand whether I should be on it, if it was a fit, and whether it made sense. And I asked her what time in my location it would be on, it would be aired, and what the station would be, and so forth, so that I could go to a friend's house and watch it. She gave me the information, and while I'm on the phone with her, I opened up the newspaper and looked at the listings, and what it said for that particular time and station horrified me. What it said was Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, which is not my idea of a good show. And so I told her what it said. She says, well, yes, that's the full name of our show. I said, well, I'm sorry. I said, I actually think your show is disgusting. You glorify the shallowest parts of people. You exalt conspicuous consumption. You incite people into greed and envy. And what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm really sorry you feel that way. But on our behalf, may I say that we're a positive show. We don't tear people up. We don't do scandal. We try to be positive. And, we're not like Hard Copy or Current Affair. Those were the other shows in those days that were like that, I guess. And I said, well, that's very nice. I said, but really, there's no show for you. I tried to describe to her the way I lived. And I looked around as I was speaking with her. We were living in a rented apartment, very small. Outside was our one car, a 1978 Datsun with 200,000 miles on it. It ran. We were happy. I'm not complaining. In fact, I loved it, but it wasn't their thing, I don't think. In fact, I was a little concerned about it. I said, are you looking for Harold Robbins, the author? She said, no, John Robbins, Diet for a New America. I said, why? I'm the opposite of what you're about. And she said, well, some of us on the staff here have read your books. And we think they're among the most important documents of this century, and we want to use our show to get your ideas and message exposure to a large number of people who might otherwise not be exposed to it. Oh, I said, why didn't you say so? But I still couldn't figure how they could do a show on the way we lived and on my kind of message. And so I told her that, and she said, well, once a year we're allowed to do a different kind of show. Once a year, she said, we do a show on very wealthy people who are philanthropists, who use their fortunes for good instead of just for vanity, I guess. And I said, well, that's very nice. I'm glad you do that. I wish you did that show every week, and once a year you did your stupid show. I said, but still, there's nothing here for you. And I reiterated that I had left Baskin-Robbins many years previously, had no financial ties to the company or my dad's fortune, and lived quite simply, actually. And it certainly didn't have that kind of money. And she said, well, you could have been rich and famous. I said, yeah, lifestyles of the could have been rich and famous. That'd be a show. And she said, well, we'll think of something. And I don't quite know what got into me, but I said, okay. And we made a date. And sure enough, on that date, at that hour, I'm sitting at home just anxious, and this van pulls up outside our driveway there, and it's a huge van. And on the side of it, in the gaudiest possible script, is written, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. I wanted to puke. And I was just, this is not, this is another collision of worlds here. But I peeked through the Venetian blinds, and out of the van comes all kinds of equipment, lights, cameras, stands to hold the things on, tape recorders, and all kinds of people. A producer, a director, 2 camera people, a sound guy, someone I found out later they called the gopher, because it was his job to go for burgers at lunch and go get what they needed. And so one man, a heavy-set, large guy, turned out to be one of the cameramen, came to the door and knocked on the door. Now, right outside the door, right by the doorknob, there was a little sign that said Robbins and the house number. He knocks on the door, and I open it. He says, excuse me for bothering you, sir, but we're looking for John Robbins' house, and you seem to have the same number on the street as he does. And I said, well, I am John Robbins, and you must be from the Lifestyle Show. Come in. And his jaw dropped. He was looking at our place. He says, this is where you live? And I didn't take offense or anything. I just said, yes, and we're very happy here. Come in. Be our guests. And he hollered back to his people, this is it! And then he said, doesn't look like the places we usually go. And I'm thinking, I'll bet that's true. And so they come in. Now, I'm wanting to be a host and gracious and help them to feel welcome. So I offered the cameraman a seat. That turned out to be a little problematic, however. It would seem it would be simple, but you see, we had, the only chairs we had were a dinette set that we had bought at Sears several decades previously. Vinyl-covered stuffed chairs. And we have a cat, or perhaps more accurately, the cat has us. He lives there, we're staff, I think. And the cat dear brown cat named Brownie Cat, who had he decides who sits where in the first place. And in the second place, for years he had decided that those chairs were his personal scratching posts. And we tried to prevent it and stop him, but to no avail, and finally we just gave up and considered it an art form. In this case, the artist is a cat, and he's changing the chairs. And so by this time, there's more actually stuffing showing than vinyl. And I gesture to the chairs, and I offer him a seat, and he looks, and he goes, I'll stand, thank you. But the people came in, one after the other. The woman who'd made the original call was there, the producer of the segment, and so forth. And for the next 4 days, we were together, and they filmed me and interviewed me, and they filmed a fundraiser I did for EarthSave International that week, and they were just filmed me on location in a few different places. And actually, it was fun. They were beautiful people. We had a good time. And the first lunchtime that came, there was this awkward silence. And then they had a little powwow, and then they agreed amongst themselves, they told me, to go veggie for the time we were together. which I thought was very respectful of them. Very nice. It certainly made for more congruence than me talking about the advantages of a vegetarian type of diet, and they're eating burgers while I'm doing it. There's a disconnect there. But we didn't have that, and they were very sweet. And it was interesting, there'd be time periods where I was being filmed, and the tape recorders are on, the lights are on, and then they'd cut and they'd turn off the equipment, and then the staff would start asking me questions. And I thought that's what they should have filmed. That was really interesting. And then at our first lunch, they decided they were going to go veggie, so the gopher didn't go out for burgers. And we made lunch. My wife, Deo, made a beautiful soup and salad we have a large organic vegetable garden. And so she made that for them, and they ate with us, which I thought was just very nice. At the end of our 4 days together, it was time for them to go, and it was a good feeling amongst us all. And the cameraman, the gentleman who'd first knocked on the door, shook my hand and said that he was very glad that this had happened, that he'd had the opportunity to be here. He said it was a first for him in many ways, including the fact that in the 8 years he'd been with the program, and the many private islands and mansions and estates he'd gone to, this was the first time he had ever been invited to share a meal with the people who lived in the home he was visiting. I said, well, I'm sorry that it's been that way, but I'm glad that you have finally had that experience. And he said that he wished his family was more like ours, more closer with each other, more joy. And that he thought that he could learn a lot from us, and that he wanted to become a vegetarian, and he asked if he could please have a copy of one of my books, which of course I was delighted to give him. And yeah. And then the woman, the producer who had made the original call, she was kind of in charge of the whole thing. At the end, she hugged me, and she actually started to weep. She said, "You have no idea how meaningful this is to me." She says, "I've been with this show for many years now, and I've been living in LA, and the air is bad, and the traffic is worse, and it's very frustrating, and there have been a lot of times I've wondered, why am I doing this?" And then she said to me, it was very interesting, she got conspiratorial in her tone. She lowered her voice, she kind of whispered, she brought her mouth close to my ear as if she was now going to say something no one else should hear. And she got very close and she said, "Sometimes the show can be very superficial." And then she said, "But now I know why I've stayed with this show all the time, is to do this program, because this is really important to me. This is good. We're going to change people's lives. We're going to help people here. This is going to make a difference." And it was very sweet. And then they left, and then it dawned on me, they've got many hours of footage, out of which they're going to take that into an editing room, and they're going to manufacture a show out of it. And they can make me look like an idiot if they want to. It's not that difficult. I manage myself sometimes. But what they ended up doing, I watched the show with some anxiety the first time, but it turns out that it's been aired many times. It was their most popular segment that year. And it's been aired worldwide, and it's been aired countless times. And they did a nice thing. They really did. Robin Leach, interesting man, called me on air the prophet of non-profit. Well, I've been called a lot of things. That's not bad. He had me. They included some footage where I had said, I quoted Thoreau, who said, "I make myself rich by making my wants few." And I thought, now isn't that a bit of a collision with their normal philosophy of the show? But they put it on. And, they used a special lens to make the living room look larger. And at one point, the camera is fanning across the living room, and there are the chairs. And Robin Leach says, and I don't know where he got this, and I don't even know what it means, but what he says as the moment that the chairs appear is, "And every stick of furniture in their house is recycled." Maybe he meant ready to be recycled, but But it was very sweet. And then at the end of the segment, at the end of the thing, they bring up the picture of the earth, God's beautiful earth, the whole earth from outer space. You've probably seen the picture, that photograph of this luminous jewel suspended amongst the stars, this exquisite act of creation. There it is. And they leave this image up on the screen for quite some time, actually. Instead, normally they flick the images very rapidly to keep you insane. And they left it on with beautiful music, very, very beautiful, deep music. And Robin Leach said, this man's life goes to show that he who believes, he who dies with the most toys wins, doesn't see the whole picture. And there's the picture of the whole earth. And I felt, yes. There's a story being told in all of this, through all of this. There's something that's being testified to here about what's important and what really gives us life. And if a show like that, which in some ways is the epitome of materialism and the almighty dollar, and that whole strand in our culture that overlooks things of the spirit and makes money everything. I'm sure you're all too familiar with it. We all are. If a show like that can recognize something else, it tells me that everybody wants, and everybody can recognize and will respond to a message of hope, a message of health, a message of truth. And that there is something in us that is much better, much greater than we're often given credit for. And I think it's something that's much better and much greater than we often give ourselves credit for. Because what happens is we pollute ourselves. You know, the culture bombards us with stimulus in all kinds of ways that pollutes, that distracts, that is not in accord with who we truly are, that it doesn't feed us, that doesn't remind us of what we're here on earth to do and to be. And we buy it. We buy it with our money. We pay attention to it. We give our attention to it. We eat it. We eat its products. And what happens then to our mind? I think what happens is we become less clear. Our emotions become disarrayed. Our bodies become unwell. And in that mind-body spirit distress, we are less obedient in the laws of our Creator. We're less clear about who we really are. And so we sell ourselves short in the process. And to be reminded that we have a possibility of living in ways and eating in ways that are healthy and simple. It is simple. It is really simple. You know, one of the things that I do is I just don't eat anything that had a face. I don't eat things that had mothers. I don't eat things that screamed or ran away or wanted to when they were killed. It makes it pretty simple. There's no cholesterol in plant foods. And when you don't eat the steaks and things like that, and I also don't eat unhealthy plant foods, honestly. I don't eat the ice cream. Well, that's not a plant food, but I don't eat cakes and candies I eat pretty simply. Food for me is actually just a form of respect and appreciation and gratitude, rather than something that I'm hurriedly filling myself up. Because, I don't need to be full. I'm already full. Thank you. And I also want to tell you one other thing about my journey, because I think it's relevant. It's certainly relevant to me, and I want to share it with you. When I was growing up and eating a great deal of ice cream, as you know, I was not well. In fact, I had polio, and I was in a wheelchair. I was paralyzed from the waist down. I had this when I was 7 years old. And it's not fun. It was very frightening. For a number of months, I had no movement at all below the waist, and great difficulty breathing. In time, movement and feeling returned to my legs, but more my right leg than my left leg. And as I was growing up, my left leg was quite weak and withered. I could not put any weight on it. When I was 21, my left leg was 3 inches shorter than my right leg, and frankly, not very much use. I used to use my hands to move it as much as anything. And I went to a doctor at that time. I remember this very well, a medical doctor, and he said to me, your growing years are over. Your bones aren't going to grow anymore. You just have to live with this. This is the way you're going to be the rest of your life. Well, have you ever thought maybe medical doctors don't always know everything? Maybe MD does not stand for medical deity? In my case, what happened was not too long after that, I changed the way I ate. I also shifted my orientation. I stopped trying to live up to my dad's expectations and started to really listen. Try to align my life with what I experienced to be divine intelligence, what I experienced to be the calling of my that was coming through my soul, where I experienced God wanted me to be. And what happened when I did that is my leg grew. It's not as strong as the other one, but it's strong. I'm a marathon runner. I'm a triathlete. And I'm in my late 50s. And there I was in my early 20s being told that I'll have a difficulty walking for my entire life. So I've experienced in my life the power of yes, the power of what happens when we give ourselves fully. But in my case, it was also a no. It was a no. I had to refuse that which was evil, that which was of darkness. And I'm not saying that my dad's business was evil, but I'm saying that the ice cream undermines, as do all the high-fat dairy products and all the high-fat animal products that pervade our culture. They undermine our well-being. They compromise our health. The data are so conclusive scientifically that the more animal fat you run through your bloodstream by eating it, the more likely you are to have a heart attack, the more likely you are to have heart disease, like my Uncle Bert Baskin did. And yet, people who don't eat that way, who eat a healthy vegetarian type of diet, be it a vegan diet or a near-vegan diet, that's based on whole foods the way nature intended, not the processed foods, not the refined and adulterated foods, and certainly not the genetically engineered foods. End up living much longer lives. And it's not just the fact that they're longer that's to me so telling, it's the quality of those years that's so meaningful. I see in our culture as a whole people living death. I mean, they're just walking or perhaps eating their ways into the grave. And they're shut down. Their senses are no longer working very well. They're not bright. There's nothing luminous about them. They're not awake to hear the callings, to hear the signals, to get the blessings and the guidance. And instead, they're stuck in little ruts. You know what I'm talking about. And they're not kind to each other usually because they don't feel good. And as they feel increasingly toxic, it takes more and more an act of will to be even decent to other people. And although I honor them for making that effort, I wish it wasn't so hard because it can be easy when you live in a way where your body will thank you because you're not treating it like a garbage dump. You're treating it like the blessing that it is, the gift from God that it is. You're treating it like the living temple that it can be. And I'm not saying worship the body, but I'm saying we are in bodies. And why not treat them well so that our minds can be bright? And so we can hear each other's hearts and be witnesses for each other's greatest truths. That to me is what life makes life fun, and that's what makes life rich. So I have never regretted. People have asked me, have you ever regretted leaving behind the fortune that you did? And I have not. There have been a few moments where I thought, well, I could use a little money right now, Lord, but never have I regretted that because it was a decision that was central to who I am and to who I've become. And I'm very appreciative of that. So I want to respect the timing. I know that we're going to take a break soon. Where are we at with that right now? I've got 5 more minutes. There was a subject I want to introduce, and I may not get too far into it now, but we'll have a little break and I may continue with it. But that's another piece to all this. It's sometimes not mentioned. We're told that we have dominion over the earth and over the other creatures, over God's creatures. But what does dominion mean? Is it a license to dominate, to exploit, to harm, to be cruel? Or is it a calling to stewardship and responsibility? If I have two sons, say, and I go out, two teenage sons, and I go out for the evening, and I tell the younger one, while I'm gone, please do what your older brother says. I'm putting him in charge. And I tell the older boy, please take care of things while I'm gone. I am, in effect, am I not giving the older boy dominion over the younger one for that period of time? But I do not expect to come home later that night and discover that he's cooked and eaten the younger one. To me, dominion means to treat with respect and care. And I want you to know that in today's meat production processes, in the factory farms and the feedlots that agribusiness controls, the way our livestock are kept today, I can't imagine a more brutal and cruel process. There is misery on our menus when we eat the products of these things. And it's not that we're cruel people, but what we're doing something, we're complicitous in something very cruel when we eat this way. Because what is happening to these animals, because it's cheaper to produce them this way, is so horrific. They're in cages barely larger than their own bodies. They're fed diets that are full of poisons, including their own waste in many cases. With cows, as you probably have heard with the mad cow disease epidemic, they are often fed ground up dead cows back to cows. We've taken an animal that's an herbivore and turned it not only into a carnivore, but into a cannibal. How unnatural. Hogs are fed recycled hog waste, excrement from themselves and their fellow tortured pigs. The poultry, the chickens are kept in cages, and they're so small, the cages, they're so tightly confined, they can't even lift a single wing. I'm talking about our layer hens for our eggs. So 99% of our eggs in this country are concentration camp eggs. It's ugly, it's sordid, it's not of God, it's poisonous, and these animals are sick. This is a terrible environment for them. And they do get stressed and they do get ill. So the industry feeds them antibiotics in every meal so as to keep them alive for the short time that they can get fat enough to slaughter, or they can extract the eggs from them, or extract the dairy milk from them. And these antibiotics then, because of the massive use of them in feedlots and factory farms, you know what happens to them? We develop resistance in the bugs, in the bacteria they're designed to kill. And we're losing our antibiotics as medicines. Now, maybe we will need antibiotics less if we live a healthy diet in the first place, a healthy life. You know, if we trust and put our trust in the right place, instead of in Monsanto's pledges that genetically engineered food will be good for us, instead of McDonald's advertisements. If we raise our kids to remember what's real. And I think that some people separate the physical and the health from the spiritual. And I was just talking to Danny before our hour together, and I said, I don't know how people can really do that for very long. I don't think it really works in the long run. I want to make everything a living statement of gratitude, of respect for our Creator.